Hi, my name's Ian Wallace. I call myself the Messed Up Counsellor, which is quite an intriguing name. And the podcast you're about to see is one of many, and we've been doing about a year now. So you can look back and see all the things we've talked about with guests and on my own over the process. A lot of the information I use in the podcast initially came from the first book I wrote in 2011. Why do we do that? What do we do about it? And that came out and was the basis of all my learning, understanding at that time, which is going back a few years now. And that process of understanding how the world works for people, how we can alter, change, and adapt it, was kind of what it was there to do with the initial stages. I've made that now an audiobook as well, so it's available on Amazon as an audio file that you can check out and you can download to your heart's content, and hopefully that will be helpful. In the podcasts, we're trying to look at all sorts of things that about human interactions, human dynamics, the world, and how we might understand it more or change it more. So it gives you lots of ideas and tools in order to think about and look at different ways of being or dealing with things. And hopefully that brings people together and makes people more able to connect and communicate. Lots of topics. If you ever want to connect to me, just obviously drop me a comment on the podcast and I shall try as much as possible to reply. And if you've got any ideas of things that we might want to use on the podcasts, then please let me know. My name's Ian Wallace. Thanks for looking and thanks for listening. Hi, welcome to another edition of Ian Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor. Today what I'd like to look at is something that I find often I work with in the counselling room, certainly with relationship partners in couples or families sometimes, where trust has been broken or has been kind of severely challenged. And trust is a weird one in a sense, because it comes in many forms. The one that most people think of is somebody having a relationship outside of a marriage or a partnership. But trust also comes in other ways. Anything that we do which challenges somebody else's boundaries without them knowing will create a trust issue. So you might say, okay, if somebody has another bank account, for example, and putting money in it, and they don't tell their relationship partner that it's there, that might invoke a trust reaction or a loss of trust reaction, should I say. So trust is a heart of most relationships, friendships, relationships. Everything is built on trust. Trust is kind of where we feel solid, secure, and safe. And if we can trust something, we can pretty much know it's going to happen, and so that's good because we know where we are. We know what is expected of us. We know what is the process is going to be within trust. But I say trust breaks down in many ways, and it doesn't have to be one event. It can be, and sometimes is, multiple events. And that has a different reaction to people involved in that relationship structure. One breakdown of trust, one thing that happens could, dependent on what it is and dependent on the person that's reacting to it, could break up a relationship. It can do. Sometimes not. But if then the trust button is hit again, then more likelihood is it'll become much more damaging. I see lots of people where things have occurred. People have had relationships, one-night stands, ongoing relationships, and their partner's found out or they've told their partner. If you get all of it out, if everything is discussed, nothing is hidden, it's not a drip effect of finding out, then there's more chance of it being salvaged. if there's a drip, I did and I didn't, and I did and I didn't kind of thing, then that usually is more damaging to the relationship, because how do I know you're telling me the truth is usually the one that people come back with. How do I know this is the truth? Because you told me that was the truth, and then you let me down again. And then you told me that was the truth, and then you let me down again. And that drip effect of finding things out is usually the most damaging one that I see, and the one that's harder to come back from. I see clients whereby trust has been broken sometimes many years ago, and the people have been trying to repair it, trying to get into a place where it doesn't produce conflict in the relationship. The problem with that tends to be that unless there's a getting everything out, unless all the questions have been answered, usually it leaves a negative aspect to people's relationships. So in order to get everything out, we use tools, counsellors use tools to enable that to happen. The problem with our work is if we find something that hasn't been known previously, or something is being made aware of that hits the trust button, then that will usually take people right the way back to when that trust situation occurred. It doesn't go back one step, usually. It goes all the way back. So the conflict, the deterioration of the relationship, if you like, is exactly what it was when you first found out. Which is why sometimes it's better to, as soon as possible, engage with somebody like myself in order to get it all out and bring a closure to it. And as I say, we have tools enabling us to do that. The person that has, and I use this terminology, abused the trust with the relationship, that person will normally want to move on very, very quickly. Because they know where they are, they know they're not going to do anything again, they're quite settled usually, so they know what's going on. The other person whose trust has been abused doesn't necessarily know that. You can say it, but they can't know it. So they're always going to be less able to just move on. They're always going to want to be going back over things and usually finding out why those things occurred. The why is usually the most important. So when we're looking at trust, then we need to kind of lance the boil, if you like, and get it all out, get all the pus out, get everything out, scoop it all out so it's no longer there. And that can take a while sometimes, dependent on what's happened and dependent on how approachable the two are to going forward and keeping the relationship going, because that sometimes can be really hard as well. So as they're moving through that process of getting all the pus out, and in that aspect, I always say to people that this is a once only offer of getting everything out. We don't want anything being left in there, because at some point in the future, if it becomes known that there is something still left in from all ends, really, that it's going to cause a problem, and it's going to take you straight the way back to where you are now, or even before they find me or get to me, when the abuse of trust occurred. People who specifically have affairs or one-night stands, and this sounds a bit silly, a bit mad, really, sometimes when I say it. The act of the affair or the act of the one-night stand is kind of like in a bubble. doesn't give rise to thoughts or ideas around consequences. They don't think about what do I do if. And the amount of times I've been working with people and I've said to the partner who abused the trust, well, what about this person that you had this liaison with, this relationship with? What is their input going forward? Are they going to be happy that it's just ended? Are they going to be okay that it won't be there in the future? What are they going to do about that? And the naivety sometimes of that person that's abused the trust. Well, what are you on about? Well, they will have had an agenda to this relationship process, this one night stand. Something they've got from it, something they wanted from it. And they're maybe not going to be happy that they no longer have the opportunity to have that. So what do you think they're going to do? And those kind of questions create some very curious conversations about, well, I didn't even think about that. I've never thought about that. It was just about me. Well, no, it wasn't. Sorry. It's about the other person as well, and they have an agenda, as I've said, and they do have things that they will connect to and do and interact with that might make it really hard for your life, your world. And sometimes that can be very vengeful. That can be very unsettling and very destructive, dependent on what's happened. But when I bring those conversations into the room, I am constantly surprised why people don't think of consequences, don't think of what happens when, if, next process. And it defies reasoning, really. But the only way I can look at it, and people have told me about it, it feels like that trust issue was in a bubble. It was self-contained. It didn't interact with their world and their life. I mean, obviously it did, because they're in front of me, talking about the relationship that isn't working. But they don't seem to think that. And that does surprise the person whose trust has been abused. That well, why didn't you think of me? Why didn't you think how it would affect us, our family, our life? And they don't, which is surprising. But as they work that trust process, as we find out the whys, what the reason was, and where it came from, and when it started, and how it happened, and all the questions that the person whose trust has been abused will have, if they can all be answered to that person's complete closure, then there's a chance you can move this forward, the relationship into a different place. There's no guarantees, obviously, because we don't know what's going to happen. Somebody might want all the questions answering, and they might still decide that they don't want to be in a relationship together. And that's okay, that's their choice. That's not a problem for us as counsellors. We then do amicable separation or damage limitation processes. The trust thing, once we've got it all out, once we're starting to rebuild and rebuild a brand new relationship, usually there'll be elements of it that are very similar, but both people will be different from that point of view of how they see the world again. So we're building something brand new. We're building something that won't be exactly the same as the previous relationship. And that's a good thing, obviously, because it needs to be different. There was a reason why it broke down. There was a reason why those things occurred. And we need to understand that and take them out of the equation to build a more connected relationship, a more fuller, wholesome relationship. So as we're going forward and we're trying to do that, then I will say to the person who abused the trust, Trust is a really weird process. And you have to now, from today, from yesterday, you have to only deliver what you can deliver. Don't agree to anything or put your hand up to anything that you cannot do. A lot of the time, people who abuse the trust are kind of whatever people, and they don't stick to what they say they do processes. They kind of go with the flow. They don't necessarily tell people if they're going to be late or if they're going to be, different to what they were expecting. So all those things we need to talk about, we need to share, we need to understand that if you say you're going to bring a bottle of milk home, daft as it may seem, and you don't, that's going to hit the trust button. And that'll take you straight the way back to where we were when we first found out about what ever happened. So those little things, incidental things, really can produce a problem. So what I say to people is don't agree to anything you can't deliver. If you can't deliver it, you've got to say, I can't deliver it. And you've got to be factual. And you've got to be real. And if you can do that, then chances are we can build this going forward. If you let that become a problem and you don't do what you say you're going to do, then that will eventually create a big problem for the relationship. Trust builds with three things in my world. It builds with words. Obviously, there has to be a starting point. It builds them with actions that follow the words. So you say, or do, should I say what you say? But then it has to have consistency. It can't just be a one-off. It's got to keep going forward all the time. That they can rely on that. They can see that is going to happen. And if you can do those three things, you can't do 2 out of 3. If you leave one of them out, it won't work. You need all 3. But if you can do that, then hopefully you can move it forward into something different. People don't normally have relationships outside of their primary relationship if everything they need is within that relationship. They usually look for something that they need and they're not getting, or they kind of want and it's not able to be delivered. They don't normally go outside if everything's okay. So we try, from a counselling point of view, build a new relationship that has all the elements that people need. Nothing that they need to go elsewhere for. And I'll say to couples when I see them, or people when I'm working on trust, you could find somebody walking past you naked and you wouldn't recognise them. You wouldn't see them because everything's been fulfilled within your relationship. And that process means that you can then have a better quality relationship where everything that you need, both people, is within the relationship, and they can find a new relationship going forward. That's sometimes the better option. Obviously not all the time. If 10% of a relationship doesn't work, then why get rid of the 90% that does if you can work on the 10% that doesn't? Sounds a bit illogical to me. To give up the whole relationship where 90% was working because I'm not getting 10% is a bit silly, really. So if we can work on the 10% that doesn't work and get that working with the 90% that does work, then obviously that's much more beneficial. It's not an easy one, is trust, and it never will be, because as I say, it does go to the heart of every relationship. But it can be worked with, but it needs everybody to be completely open and honest and to want and to be motivated to make that relationship work. Paying lip service to it because other things as part of that relationship, whether that's financially or kids or, other people's input, making a relationship work for that will at some point not work. And sometimes those conversations can be helpful to have if you're a counsellor and watching this. Promoting those conversations can be helpful because usually people are thinking about it even if they're not saying it. And having those conversations, those dialogues, means that people can be more aware, more understanding of each other, more able to share what their needs are. And that will be only good for going forward in their world. It's a really tricky one is trust. And as I've said, it's one of the hardest things to work with in relationships. But it can be worked. It can be brought forward. It can be made to be okay. But we do need to do an awful lot of work on being honest to make it happen. Hopefully that's made sense, and hopefully it's given you some optimism for going forward if trust is an issue in your world and your life. And going forward means even if you're not in the relationship where the trust was abused, then at least finding out why you did what you did would be helpful to you as well going forward for any future relationships. So it's always helpful to find out what's driving us, what's making us do those things, where we're coming from, in a sense. If you've enjoyed this podcast, although it's a difficult topic, I understand that, then please like and share and give it to other people as an option. Because as I said, trust isn't just about people going off with somebody else or spending time with somebody else. It can be some small things. And sometimes we don't talk about those things for all sorts of reasons. My name's Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. Take care. Hi, thanks for listening to the podcast, and hopefully it made sense and was interesting for you. Please subscribe, like and share. With the podcasts, you never know who will be helped by the things we talk about, things we share. We don't normally tell people our problems, but by sharing it and helping other people to understand things. The book Insecurity, It's All About Me, is also available now through Amazon. And it gives you an understanding of what drives insecurity, how insecurity works within our human dynamics, and how you can get a much more secure connection with people. It gives you lots of ideas and thoughts, which is really good. So thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, share, hit the button. And if you've got any comments, please give me them and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks very much. Take care.